Afternoon, everyone. As is the case, we've got a lot of people signed up for this webinar this afternoon. So we're going to just give it a few seconds just for everyone to join. It's one of those topics I know many people are going to be interested in. In fact, many people are interested in, given the amount of people that have joined up this afternoon. So it's going to be a thought-provoking and informative session, I'm sure. That was quite a mouthful, but I managed to get it out. So yes, lots to cover this afternoon. So I am going to get started in a second with a little bit of an introduction by myself before I hand over to the amazing team at SQL Group, who have a lot to cover off this afternoon in what is a lunchtime session for us here at VMA Group. We have a lot of these sessions booked in over the next few months, and we find that the lunchtime session works best for everyone. So hopefully you've got your lunch, you've got a coffee with you, and you can sit back and relax and take everything in over the next 60 minutes. So I think I will slowly get started. And I should say, I guess, formally, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Andrew Harvey, and I'm the CEO of VMA Group. Actually, as I say, I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar with all of you this afternoon and the fantastic team from SQL Group. So a big welcome to Suzanne and Rebecca, and thanks for being here this afternoon. And we're going to be talking about a topic which I know so many of you, so many of us have had to juggle and manage for many, many years now. But as I say, I'm sure there is going to be some stuff that we can learn this afternoon and take away. And just as a reminder of the topic, it is from vanity to sanity and the changing face of measurement. And as I say, we've got a presentation from Suzanne and Rebecca. They've got lots to share with us this afternoon. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a second because I'm sure they'll do a far better job of it than I possibly could. But before I hand over to Suzanne and Rebecca, I just thought I would give a bit of context as to why we're having this discussion this afternoon. I'm sure many of you will know that VMA Group is a communications specialist recruitment company. We do communications and marketing, but communications recruitment is a massive part of what we do. And actually, we've been doing that now for nearly 50 years. In fact, we turn 48 this year, I believe it is. And so over the last 48 years, and even every day of the week currently, we speak to hundreds of IC professionals. So we're speaking to hundreds of internal comms professionals every week, hundreds of comms professionals every week as well. And when we do that at scale, we start to see themes emerge in the conversations that we have. You speak to 100 directors of internal comms, you have a conversation for 60 minutes, certain themes start to emerge and patterns start to form. And one of the topics, one of the themes, or one of the patterns that we've seen emerge quite significantly, even since the start of this year, but also at the back end of last year, is the topic of measurement and particularly really demonstrating value. And again, as I said at the top of the call, I think it is a topic, measurement and value, that we will have thought about many times over. So it's an old challenge, but actually our view is that it's an old challenge in a new world. And I think without too many cliches, I don't want to come at you with too many cliches. If you look at the world in which we live in at the moment, if you think about the politics that are going on, if you think about the changes in tech and AI, if you think about the economic challenges that many people face at the moment, I think it is a new world in which we live in. And we're trying to manage these old challenges in a new world in different ways. And financially at the moment, for many organizations, it's proving really difficult to generate profit and generate business. And we've seen that a lot of communications teams are coming under the spotlight in terms of investment being cut, teams being cut, questions being asked about value and what difference those comms teams are making. And therefore, measurement and demonstrating value has become even more important for leadership teams and for CEOs. And many of the comms teams that we see that are struggling to get investment and where we're seeing teams being cut, it is often because the leaders are really struggling, to demonstrate the value that they deliver. So we thought it'd be super, super interesting and important right now to talk about the challenge again of measurement and value. And actually, when thinking about that, we thought there's no one better placed to talk to us this afternoon about this than SQL Group. SQL Group are a very well-known, very well-trusted employee engagement agency. They have a huge amount of experience on this topic and working with all sorts of clients of all sorts of sizes, both across the UK and internationally. So I thought it would be great to have a conversation with them this afternoon. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Suzanne and Rebecca. They're going to share their presentation and talk through some thoughts and experiences that they have. The only other thing I wanted to say is, as is often the case, if you've got any questions, I'm sure many of you will have questions, do put them into the chat, as is often the done thing these days, and we will do our best to answer those questions when we get to the end of the presentation. I'm sure we'll have a lot of time for that. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne and Rebecca to introduce themselves and take us through their presentation. And thanks again for both of you joining us this afternoon.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting us. I'm Suzanne and I'm MD of SQL Group. And also on your screens, you'll see my colleague Becky, and she's Insight and Content Manager at SQL. I can see there's a few familiar faces on the session today, but for those who don't know us, hey, we're SQL Group, and we're more than 40 years old. Got 25 people. There's a lot on this slide, but in a nutshell, what we do is we partner with organizations to build thriving workplaces. So combining our insight and creativity and technology to engage people and to create workplaces where people really want to work. It's also about delivering impact, and that bit is really important and ties in well to what we're discussing today, measurement. So what we want to do is to talk about some of the key trends that we believe are really changing the face of measurement and internal comms. And this insight, it comes from our work, especially in strategy and measurement with global clients, from market research and also the industry trends, and that more than 20 years experience in finding out what employees really want from communications. So we're going to touch on how measurement translates to performance, why we need outcomes, not outputs, the importance of continuous listening, the dangers that can be of inaction, and of course, a bit about AI too, because I don't think any webinar these days without AI in it would be worth its salt. So over to you, Becky.
Great, thank you. And can I just check, are the slides, they're moving okay? Because they jumped a bit then. We're good? Perfect. All right, so before we properly get started, we wanted to just say a bit about why this is important. And obviously, Andrew has brilliantly touched on this already, but just to reiterate what he was saying, it all comes back to this quote for us. So without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And we think this is a perfect summary of why data is so important. So imagine going into a board meeting and you're asking for budget for a new intranet. You ask for £1 million. And what's the first question you're going to get from your CEO? Why do we need one? Why should we make this huge investment? And if you said, oh, I just think we do, it's important for comms, you'd be laughed out of the room. But if you went in with data and said, we can see from our usage data that it's taking an average of 15 minutes for people to find the content they need on our current intranet, and that's costing us £500,000 a year in lost time. Or, we've carried out user research and found out that the intranet has a 15% satisfaction rate against, our target of 60%. So the current experience is having a direct impact on the way that people feel about living here. And also, a third of people who have left in the last 6 months have mentioned in their exit interviews, that they're not happy with the intranet and it's contributed to their poor experience. That's going to be a really different discussion. So you've got a mix of qualitative and quantitative data there. You're not just going in to share your opinion, you're armed with that data. And having that evidence is really vital and gives your recommendations a true foundation to build on. So this is also echoed in findings from Gallagher's State of the Sector report last year too. So this report found that there was a strong correlation between the usage of data and the ability to exceed targets on KPIs, objectives, success indicators. So, of course, this might seem obvious, if you've got the data to show that you're achieving your objectives, then you're more likely to be seen as doing so. But the real lesson here is that matching those metrics to specific targets creates that commercial language that leaders understand, and that's all about performance.
Thanks, Becky. So for the first part, we're going to look at the latest trends in measurement. So the ones we're using to help us to create that commercial language that speaks to leaders, talking about actions taken and sharing impacts. And that takes us really nicely to our first trend. And Becky's going to talk about how we focus on outcomes, not outputs.
Great, yes. So when we ask our clients if they measure, many of them will kind of point us towards their analytics from their digital platforms. So that might be, yes, I've got these open rates. I can see where people are clicking, how many impressions we're getting on things. And while results like these do have their place, they are what we call vanity metrics. So these show activity and answer the question, what happened? But they don't answer the question of so what. So you can and should be very proud if you have an email newsletter that's getting a 70% open rate. But what that open rate doesn't tell you is, have people understood the messages and has behavior changed as a result? And as this quote here shows us, we need to be asking what behaviors our communications have driven and how they're driving business results. Because we know that leadership increasingly want and need proof of impact, and to be able to link communications to business priorities such as productivity, culture, behavior change, and customer satisfaction. So outcome focused measurement means that IC is speaking the same language as the business. Impact, value, return on investment, and contribution to results. All of that lifts us from being a service function to being a more strategic driver of organizational performance. So it also strengthens and builds on the credibility of the IC team as well, and their influence in the organization too. So instead of saying, we had 500 people attend the town hall on the new strategy, which is great, but you could also have measurement in place that you can say, understanding of the strategy increased by 32% and 84% of our managers feel confident in communicating it. And that kind of data and impact really changes the conversation, resource and budget decisions, and that perceived strategic value of the IC team. And while vanity metrics do have their place, they can't do that on their own. So here's an example from a recent communication audit that we ran. So it was a channel audit where we were trying to uncover which channels frontline colleagues were using to get their information. As part of that research, we ran a survey and we asked people to say where they got their information from. So we had 9 key business topics and they had to choose where they got that information from. Email was the top answer for every single one of them. So that tells us a lot already. It tells us, obviously, that email is a major source of information for employees, but it also tells us that it's being used as a catch-all. So on any given day, a colleague might find an email about a business update, an update on their shift patterns, instructions on how to order their new uniform, and a people story about a charity event and how much money was raised. And in our professional experience, that didn't sit quite right. It felt like too much reliance on email. But it's only when we coupled that with further insight that we could kind of move towards the diagnostics and evidence of that. So as part of our research, we also did site visits and spoke to employees. And they did tell us that, yes, that's right, we get a lot of our information from email, but actually that's not really working from us. As this example quote shows, to communicate there was, in some sense, just to email, but people didn't have time to filter through these crammed inboxes and find out what matters. So it was only by combining those data sources that we could understand the outcome and the behavior that was following and telling a clearer story of what's happening and why. I think this is a really interesting quote from the chief exec of American Express. And it just sums up what we're saying here. You need to gather data that gives you information and provide the so what. So, how do you go about doing that? So, to be able to focus on the outcomes in your measurement, we recommend delving into the detail to find the why. So, as we've talked about with the example we just shared, that might be coupling qualitative research with quantitative research. So, for example, rather than just saying how many people visited the page that's hosting your new strategy, arrange a manager-led discussion afterwards and create a feedback channel for them to tell you how the strategy is received and understood and any questions they might have. For digital comms as well, we've seen many of our clients add a kind of was this useful, yes or no button to comms to get an immediate feedback on whether what they read, whether it helped them. Next, it's about connecting the dots. So linking up with other teams and using their data points. So your organization will be stocked full of data that you can use to help prove your impact. So for example, you might have run a campaign to get people to start using an HR platform. So as well as looking at how many people are logging on the platform and moving around it, ask HR how many requests and questions they're now getting in comparison to before. Hopefully that will have dropped. And then finally, turn your data into information. So dashboards and infographics are absolutely fab ways to show results, but don't forget to add context. So we always recommend doing a highlights presentation of any measurement to walk through key stakeholders through key points. But if you can't get that face-to-face moment in, you could also record a little audio commentary to play over the top of your slides so they can play that while they flick through. And it just makes sure that they're getting that full story. And now I'll pass over to Suzanne for our second lesson.
Helps if I mute myself, doesn't it, really? Well, when we started measuring internal comms activity, it's over 25 years ago now, many organisations would carry out a big review, every 2, 3, or even 4 years, like a big employee engagement survey. And they'd be carrying out a comprehensive audit of all their comms activity. And then they'd use that data to shape the approach for the next few years. Now, while these larger projects are still a valuable part of the measurement mix, we love them because it's always fascinating to do a deep dive like that. But these days, it just can't be your only concession to measurement. The world, and our working world in particular, is just moving too fast. And an annual review, well, basically, it's just too slow. Because today it's all about continuous listening. And that's about regularly listening, evaluating, and refining. We've worked with some client organisations in the past who run quarterly campaigns. For example, perhaps Q1 could be about well-being, Q2 about building digital skills. But the thing is, they've either never measured the impact of those campaigns or perhaps carried out some wider measurement once every 2 years. So how could you expect somebody, say, in a focus group to remember the details of a campaign they saw nearly 2 years ago? Because what you're doing this way is you're repeating the same approach over and over again and just hoping that you're doing the right things. And this is echoed by these statistics shown here on this slide from the State of the Sector report. I think what's key for us is that while a third of internal comms professionals say that listening is in their top 3 when it comes to their purpose, only 23% of them are happy with the progress they're making. Only 2 in 5 have reviewed a listening strategy, or 1 in 3 said their business didn't have a listening strategy at all. And that's a really worrying trend because listening is essential for clear communication. It doesn't matter what kind of business you are. because it makes sure messages are being understood and acted upon, and that people feel heard and understood, and it contributes towards engagement. They're just a couple of the benefits. Now, here's again something from our experience. We helped one of the UK's largest funeral providers with embedding a listening strategy a couple of years back. And what we did is we ran quarterly interviews with a random selection of people from throughout this very diverse business. And it really helped the organisation to spot some issues before they became a major problem. So an example of this, the organisation had responded to feedback and launched team brief sessions as one of their official channels. And they were emailing out the support packs, and everything on the surface actually looked fine. But when we spoke to employees, we found out it wasn't all happening. It was happening inconsistently or not at all around the business. And so despite all this fanfare and the energy going into it, these team meetings were a bit of a flop. So thanks to this quick evidence, we could recommend some training for line managers to help them understand the value of comms and the importance of their role in it. And sure enough, the team brief sessions started up again. They were more consistent, so they were more effective and became a much better experience for colleagues. So what's our advice? How can you curate a listening culture in your organisation? There's so many options available to us now for regular measurement. So firstly, digital analytics. Of course, we have to be careful not to rely solely on the vanity metrics that Becky was talking about, but they do give us something. It gives us a rough idea of how things are listening. Pulse surveys. A client of ours has a weekly poll on their intranet homepage. It's about a hot topic or something they really want to understand in more detail. A third option is listening groups. A benefit is it's really quick and cheap. And we love this because you could ask 10 people to speak to 10 colleagues. And wow, you've got 100 pieces of feedback with minimal effort. And as we've talked about just now, for some of our clients, we've done quick research every couple of months. We speak to, say, 15 people at random from across the business and find out how they're feeling and what their ideas are. Another option is sentiment analysis, because it's becoming more mainstream now, thanks to the likes of Viva Engage and other social platforms. But a caveat we would have is that it's based on discussions that people are happy to have in public. It's not really telling you what your people are saying in the pub on a Thursday night. You could also run Ask Me Anything events, a bit like the ones you find on Instagram or Reddit with celebrities or influencers, but these for leaders to make themselves available with no agenda and just to listen to what people are talking about. Because, of course, organising leader drop-ins where the idea is that leader will listen and learn rather than jump to presenting solutions is really valuable. And research shows us that leaders who are good listeners earn much higher levels of trust. Back to you, Becky.
Thanks, Suzanne. So you've got some really valuable stats and data from all your measurement, but then comes in another risk, and that's the risk of overwhelming people, of surveys, and in particular, data fatigue. So nowadays, pretty much everything in the workplace seems to be a data point. In HR, for example, measurement post-pandemic feels like a bit of a default setting. So, you can monitor every absence, workflow, performance check-in. It's all being logged, time-stamped, aggregated. So organizations and the people in them are a little bit drowning in data. And we are seeing signs that people feel over-surveyed, underheard, and overwhelmed by constant requests for feedback and metrics that just don't feel meaningful to them. And one of the biggest reasons for this is because so often employees will give their time and their efforts to share their thoughts and opinions and receive nothing in return. And we don't just mean that thanks for taking part message that pops up at an end of the survey, even though that is also important. They don't get updates on what came out of the research and what actions are being taken as a result. And that can be the real sense of fatigue. So, more than survey fatigue, we believe that inaction fatigue is the real danger. And indeed, the IC index reports that more than a third of employees say that their organisation neither welcomes open and honest feedback nor shows how it informs decisions and actions. And of those respondents, less than a quarter would recommend their employer as a great place to work. And then similarly, research into HR professionals shows that even where they have increased their listening efforts, only a quarter, just over a quarter, sorry, would believe that these programs are leading to more meaningful business results, because then those data points are not being used to drive business change. So sharing results and outcomes after research isn't exactly rocket science. It's very logical. But why are so many organizations failing to do it? So we hear a lot of different reasons. So it might be a lack of skills or confidence in their ability to take the data and to analyze it. It can also be sometimes that that the stakeholders don't like what they're seeing, and don't particularly want to draw attention to the results that they've got. And it also can be that they themselves are overwhelmed by the amount of feedback and suggestions that they've received and feel like they don't have the time to go through it. It gets moved down the priority list until it feels too late to address, because leaders are also exhausted and also time poor with all the changes that are going on in the working world and the world in general, as Andrew was talking about at the beginning of the session. So it can be hard for them to make time for something if they don't see it as a priority. So for larger pieces of research, we have worked with organisations to run those "you said we did" style campaigns, where we share what activities are happening as a result of employee surveys or audits. So if we've done a promotional campaign for a survey, like the one on the right that you can see here, we also recommend running a follow-up part that thanks for participation and says what's happening next. You close the loop and make employees feel valued and help to build trust in your listening culture. And there's an example on the left there of a kind of "you said we did" campaign that we ran after a larger employee survey. Because it really does come down to that failing to act on feedback can be more damaging than not asking for it at all. So how can you avoid that inaction fatigue? So first of all, just remember the basics and start small. It doesn't always need to be a huge poster campaign. Always remember to thank people for their time. We can't count how many times we've had to remind some of our clients to send out a thank you note and tell people what's happening next. To those who've attended a focus group or an interview, it's just a small way of closing that loop at the beginning. And then after the research, sharing the highlights, but don't worry about having all the answers. Acknowledge that it could take some time to analyze or find solutions on responses, and then get on it. Also, pick your battles. So trying to solve everything at once just is going to lead to your own inaction and exhaustion. So a McLean and Co report found that companies focusing on fewer well-executed listening goals see better results than those who are trying to spread their efforts, and it's just all going a bit too thin. So look for patterns in employee feedback and tackle one or two major themes at a time. That targeted approach is going to build trust faster, than attempting to fix everything at once. And then finally, lean on others. So IC and HR teams and senior leadership cannot carry the whole burden, obviously, of acting on feedback. And managers play a key role in addressing concerns at the team level. It's a company-wide responsibility, and that way changes will happen faster. And it just stops everything piling up at the top and makes solutions as well feel more personal and effective.
Thanks. So that's kind of a summary of our latest thinking and recommendations for now. But at the title of this webinar says, Measurement is always changing, and particularly as our workplaces change and technology advances, the way we measure and evaluate workplace communication, well, that's changing too. So Becky, she's going to run through 3 trends to look out for in the future of measurement.
Thanks, Suzanne. So our first trend is around meeting participants where they are. And by that, we mean research participants, so your employees. So when you think of measuring your communications, you're probably thinking of the classic techniques. So surveys, interviews, focus groups, platform analytics. And these are all really important and valuable measurement techniques. However, with technology advancing all of the time and the way that employees interact with channels at work also changing, there are new and updated ways to measure comms. So we're part of the Market Research Society, and we get to see how research professionals use the latest technique to great impact and effect. And as a side note, if you are interested in the latest measurement and research techniques, the Market Research Society have a page called Research Live, where you can see all the latest news and opinions when it comes to measurement. So we're having a quick look at some of these different techniques that we can bring in. The first one is online bulletin boards and text chats. So rather than asking employees to meet at a specific time, you can bring the measurement to them and run online bulletin boards. So this is particularly useful if you want to have a discussion over several days or you're wanting to talk to people in different time zones. You're basically giving people a set time period to come and answer questions or perhaps respond to stimuli like looking at examples of a campaign you want to launch. You can make it biased or unbiased. So when they go, they could initially see just questions for them and then get to see everybody else's responses when they have done, or you can turn it into a group thing. Then there's text chat too. So this is a bit like holding a live focus group, but instead of speaking, you're typing your answers into a chat box. So it's a type of instant messaging. It's really good when you want every single participant to answer every single question, which isn't always possible or practical in a focus group. And it's different in a survey in that you're responding to it live. So if someone's put a response into the chat, you can then go back and ask another question and delve deeper into different points. There's also social listening platforms too. And this is useful if your employees use a lot of digital channels. It's basically taking sentiment analysis that you might already do to the next level. So Pulsar, the example shown here, they say that they combine social listening and audience segmentation. That means that you can discover kind of the main communities in your audience and see how each of them is talking about the same topic differently. And that can help you to tailor your content and target your approach to your different employee groups. Then there's also ethnography or mobile ethnography. So I'm sure some of you may be aware, but ethnography is the immersive study of people and cultures in their natural environment. So it helps us to understand behaviors, beliefs, and social interactions. So an example in the workplace might be is shadowing employees at their role to see what time they have for comms and how they're using comms, as well as what's important to them from an employee experience point of view. And then mobile ethnography is the same thing but done remotely. So you can use apps like the one here that's shown, which is called Indemo, and you can use mobile ethnography research where employees capture actions and feedback through text, image, and video. We've had some really interesting results from running communication diaries. So we don't necessarily have to use an app like this for that. You can simply use a Word document, but we ask employees to note down their interactions with communication over a select time period and how they rate that experience. And it gives you a real insight into what comms looks like for them. And quite often it's quite overwhelming and you just see how much they're getting. So yeah, ethnography is particularly useful if you're interested in how people are behaving and what they're thinking and feeling as well. And it also brings people to life for your stakeholders as well. So if you've got someone who needs some convincing or might find it hard to relate to the comms experience of someone on the front line, this is a really useful way to do that. Our second trend is about AI. And as we've said, we can't have a future trends section without talking about AI. So loads has already been said about how AI is a tool in our toolkit, a supplement to our skills rather than a replacement for what you do. Well, this measurement trend is a little bit different. And there are signs that AI could actually become your research assistant. So YouGov has launched an AI tool that runs AI moderated interviews. So they reported that they were having trouble with their surveys and getting people to answer questions in them. So they found that open-ended answers were getting shorter, dropout rates in the survey were climbing, and respondents were just increasingly disengaged. So instead, they are starting to implement AI moderated interviews where the AI interviewer basically picks up the qualitative part and asks the respondents questions to gain that context. YouGov's argument is that this collects data at scale without losing, the depth and the nuance that you would get from a human conversation. It is a really interesting thought and not one that has been just restricted to measurement. I have actually heard from friends who have had their first interview performed by an AI agent over the phone, which was very interesting for them. But what is a bit concerning about this trend, though, is that Market Research Society members are reporting that AI-generated answers are starting to creep into their research. So an online community project that was conducted by the company Opinium was looking at the needs and behaviours of young drivers, and they were seeing that quite a few participants were using AI-generated answers to just pop into either reading them out or popping them into a survey. So, as the research exec said, the use of AI raises concerns about the authenticity of the responses that we seek. If the essence of our work is to tap into people's unique views, AI-generated answers could dilute the richness of our insights. So, we're already seeing huge spikes in employees using AI to do their work naturally as the technology improves. But do we want them to be using AI to give us their feedback too? To kind of echo what the opening exec was saying, it really does risk losing the integrity and the authenticity of the data if we start, using AI to respond to research too. And then our final trend is around the expected increase in predicted analytics. So as we get better at using data to analyze what's happened and why, we can also start to think about what that means for what's coming. So what have we learned here that can help us predict what is happening in future? As we keep saying, we've got so much data at our fingertips now, especially as the use of AI and machine learning starts increasing. So analytics can start learning about our behavior and predict how we might behave in future. Importantly, they can forecast emotional effects as well and preference patterns to kind of nudge us and personalize future choices. So if you think about Netflix or your streaming platform of choice, it learns what you watch and what you like. It asks you at the end of watching a series, did you like this? And you can either thumbs up or thumbs down rate it. And also by seeing what types of content that you're just going to and you're naturally drawn to. So a lot of that is to do with hyper personalization. So hyper personalization uses technologies such as AI, machine learning and real-time data to create those highly individualized experiences. It's a customer engagement technique that we think will have a real impact on how employees engage with internal communications too. So as employees start to engage more and more with those AI tools at work, their employee experience is also becoming hyper-personalized. So the likes of Microsoft Copilot build up a profile of you based on your interactions and serve you information based on your likes and dislikes. So it seems a safe bet to assume that employees are going to increasingly expect this from their internal communications too. So for example, by using hyper-personalization, we might see that someone usually ignores their emails, but they always visit the intranet when they need something. So in future, with a hyper-personalized experience for them, we'd concentrate our efforts on giving them a personalized and useful and relevant intranet page rather than emailing it to them. Or perhaps it might be something like running targeted email campaigns tailored to each individual, with the technology serving only the information relevant to them and their role and their likes and their preferences at the best time for them to read it. So, as IBM says here, these types of data points and machine learning allow us to predict how people will behave, but also to give them that really personalized individual experience. And that can really help to generate and foster a sense of connection and trust.
Thank you. I'm aware that we've covered so much. So as we wrap up, we just wanted to share 3 things that we recommend you start doing now to build that more meaningful and impactful measurement experience. Number 1 is to delve into the why where you can. So start small and build up. So even if it's just collecting anecdotal feedback at first, catch colleagues in the corridor at the start of the meetings and ask them how they found your latest communication. The second tip we'd say is turn your data into information through storytelling. So, for example, can you add commentary context to that data? You could record a soundtrack for your presentations or present where you can in person. And finally, close the loop. I know it seems simple, but that's saying thank you for taking part and sharing the highlights of results and recapping those actions. Acknowledge the feedback, even if you don't have the answer or the solution just yet. And that's it. That brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time, especially over lunch, and for listening. And I'll do reach out to us if you want to know anything more about what we talked about today. And that's it from us for now. So back to you, Andrew, and your questions.
Indeed, fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Suzanne. I thought that was really interesting. Again, I've been around this game in this industry for a long time, but there were definitely some things there in terms of the trends and stuff that I wasn't aware of. And I talk a lot. I meet hundreds, thousands of comms professionals every year. And I'm a big advocate of continued professional development. I fully believe that no one knows everything and the world is changing around us. As I said right at the start, the only way to deal with it is to try and keep learning and investing in that learning. And I think you shared some great stuff with us this afternoon. And I'm sure there's 1 or 2 things that people can take away from that. And as I said before, I think it's really important more than ever to get this stuff right. So thank you for sharing that. If anyone's got any questions, please do put them into the chat. We've got 1 question here. I've got a couple of questions as well myself I was going to ask, but I'll ask this one firstly from Claire, Susanna, from Rebecca, if I can. So how do you correlate sentiment to annual engagement surveys? What are your thoughts on that?
So you can definitely do sentiment analysis of responses in annual engagement surveys, if I'm understanding the question correctly. So yes, if you have free text answers in there that employees are sharing their opinions and their thoughts, then you absolutely can do sentiment analysis of those answers and pull that out from there.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another question here from Tasneem. How do you make sense of the different qualitative feedback into something actionable?
So that I guess it really depends on the feedback you're getting and the type of action it would relate. But this is quite tricky. It really depends on the kind of feedback you're getting, because sometimes it could be something quite straightforward that you're getting qualitative feedback, which is people saying to you, everybody says the intranet is terrible, so then you would then have the action to change the intranet. I think it's what we were saying before. It's coupling different types of measurement together to prove the robustness of your data. Qualitative feedback helps you to build the action planning, because it more often will show you the sentiment and the behaviors behind your data. So I think I suppose that's it, that the qualitative data is the bit that will give you the something actionable quite often, because it's where you're getting the most kind of bang for your buck. It's where you're getting the most information from. But yeah,
Yeah.
it can really vary depending on what the feedback is that you're
Yeah.
getting.
And I think as well, just to chip in some organizations, I've seen them really ignoring the qualitative and just going with the quantitative. I hate those words. I can never say them. And I think that's a real shame, because it comes back to Becky's point about the why. We really need the context to help us understand the data. It's not just about getting reams of data and reams of stats. It's the understand. I would rather have fewer stats, have like 10 people answer something and have the qualitative stuff than not have that.
Okay. That is great. I was just I had some questions I was noting down when I was listening. So we talked about listening a fair bit, and we talk about continuous listening. So in a world of continuous listening, is there still a place for what I would call one-off comms audits? How does that continuous listening impact, that traditional kind of regularity of audits that may have happened?
Yes. So what I would say at the moment is there is a definite place for them, because as we've seen, the continuous listening programs are not in place yet. So they're a fantastic way to get that pulse check of your organization, to do some proper deep research and delve into the why. I mean, we do communication audits, so I'm kind of doing myself out of a job here, but I do say the ultimate goal would be that you wouldn't need them, because you would have continuous listening programs that were in that would give you that data all of the time. But at the moment, they are still valuable and still needed, because those programs aren't in place.
Okay. And just going back to the AI thing. So again, it's if we had a pound for every time you mentioned the word AI, right, we'd all be millionaires. But just in terms of the measurement process again, how can you ensure that the results, the insights that you get remain authentic, just kind of free from bias, all of this sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that we're also exploring, because obviously we're testing AI and what it can do in our own measurement practices as we go through um, running our own communication projects, measurement projects. It is also something that I've been looking into the Market Research Society and how they're dealing with it. At the moment, AI is good at doing kind of helping with analysis. Um, Perhaps you've got loads and loads of survey data, and it can kind of do the heavy lifting for you that perhaps you might have done in the past with Excel and formula in there, which I absolutely hate. But Copilot or an AI tool could help you to do that much quicker. When it comes to kind of writing survey questions or writing focus group questions or interview questions, kind of the bit where bias can really creep in. At the moment, it can only go so far. In our testing that we've done, and I've also seen that the Market Research Society is saying the same, it can kind of give you a bit of a start, but you still need that human
Mm.
element in there. And that's the same as well with the data analysis at the end as well. It's just making sure that the human judgment is still always there. It's always got to have oversight. Um,
Yeah.
and you've got to balance that kind of efficiency with the ethics as well of using AI.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And actually, I've got a another question here from Annette. Really good question. So, investment in measurement of external comms, so PR, reputation, etc., tends to be much higher than internal. What's your advice for making a successful business case for doing this properly for employees beyond the engagement survey? And she goes on to say here, like it or not, eyes are more often on the customer than they are the employee when budgets are tight, which I think is probably a fair reflection of what I hear as well. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think with that, Annette, we feel your pain. If only we had those budgets, it would be absolutely amazing, wouldn't it? I think for me, it always comes down, there is so much information out there about the value of engaged employees and what they bring to an organization. So the impact on trust, the impact on productivity. So there's plenty of places. That's where I would probably start. And Becky?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's quite similar, I guess, yeah, to making a business case for internal communication in general. So yeah, having those stats to back you up. Also, if you can find anything from within your own business. So again, going out to HR and IT, for example, if you're saying, say you say, usage of the intranet is really low and people aren't able to find what they need. You could say if it's taking someone an extra 10 minutes on average a day to find something, that works out to this much in lost productivity, which works out to this much cost to the business. You can kind of find some kind of stats in there that speak to more of the kind of performance and return on investment language. And then also, I would say, find case studies of other organizations who have done audits or measurement. So reach out to people in your network and say, has anybody done a communication audit? Can I use you as an example? Because quite often, you're going to impress your CEO when you say, oh, one of our competitors or this really successful organization, they did some measurement, they do this, and look at how well they're doing. So it can kind of be a bit of, we're running behind if we don't do this.
Yeah. And we can also help with some, it's not scientific, but with some just basic benchmarking, perhaps of where I know you can't compare an apple with a pear, but just with some very basic benchmarking of what organizations are doing and what they're seeing results.
That is very helpful and informative. I have another question as well, though. I'm mindful that two things actually. We've got people on the call today that are listening in from outside of the UK, and I know yourselves at Sequel, you've worked with organisations outside of the UK, so you're not, international business. You're not just UK focused. I suppose the question is one of culture. So, in terms of measurement, people's appetite to be involved, to fill out surveys, to the listening groups, is there differences? When you start looking at different countries in terms of culture and the way people behave, do you see that as a particular challenge that needs to be addressed in some ways?
I'll let Becky answer this one.
Yes, we definitely have had that. So we've run, from a very practical point of view, yes, we've run research projects across the globe. So we've had issues in that, trying to run focus groups with people who English isn't their first language, or perhaps they don't really speak English at all. So we've had to do it where we've had, obviously with the advent of AI, where you can have translation tools within the focus group itself. But that can obviously stall the flow of a focus group. So you need to have quite an experienced moderator to be able to handle that. We have also done kind of train the trainer sessions where we've asked someone more locally to run research for us. But you do see cultural differences as well. We were running a series of research for a charity that was based particularly in South America. They had a lot of people, and we found that there was not very much feedback because it wasn't culturally something they were very comfortable with, some of the people we were speaking to. So they were just kind of nodding and saying, yes, everything's fine, because they felt that they were going to be maybe criticized or told off if they said something that wasn't. What we quickly discovered there was that was then a case of, right, thinking about the cultures that you're going into and prepping people beforehand, preparing them, not sending them in blind to a research situation that might not sit right with their cultural sensitivities. And then finally as well, it is as much as you can without breaking anonymity, thinking about those differences when you're analyzing data as well. So if you've got those kind of demographics, you apply that kind of cultural thinking as well when you're analyzing the results.
I think what I just add to that, my personal experience was that, when you're doing survey and focus groups with people in the Far East and Middle East, you get far better attendance. I think there's that almost embedded, I belong to this company. But having said that, you need to make sure there aren't too many managers in a focus group, because then that tends to silence everybody else. The hierarchy it's quite traditional, and also my personal experience, like with South America and some European countries, is in a way you need to be very clear about what they are getting from this. It's far more a case of, well, why should I do this? So the context and setting out the why is really important.
Yeah. I think so many of the people that I meet along the way, work for international global companies, are getting this stuff right and trying to understand what to do, I think is really important. So that is good to share. I've got perhaps a final question for you, which I'm going to divide in two halves. So I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. Based on your experience, it's a kind of stop start. So all the people you meet along the way juggling this sort of stuff, what's the one thing they should probably stop doing? That's a bit of a waste of time. That's kind of, no longer relevant, but they're doing it with enthusiasm, but it's not really moving the dial. And actually, what's the one thing everyone should start doing? The first thing they should start doing, the first thing they should stop doing. What are your final thoughts on that?
I will go with the stop. I think the stop is the one-off, once a year survey about how comms is. Obviously, if you haven't got anything, it is useful, but could you even break that down into doing it twice a year? Just even if it can't be complete continuous all the time listening, but yeah, just having more touch points. So that's probably the biggest mistake we see, just only having one moment for measurement in the year. It just isn't enough.
And I think that's a very easy takeaway, isn't it? That's a really good thing for people to take away. Suzanne, then what's the first thing everyone should start doing?
I am very proud to be an internal communicator because I think we have such a unique position within our organisations. So the one thing we should do is get out there and start listening, because we're like an amoeba. We can travel across an organisation from top to bottom, bottom to top, and it's a fantastic role to be in. And so I think by listening more, by people will talk to us, I think, because most communicators tend to be quite friendly people, and, we usually don't have an agenda. We just want to listen. We just want to make things better. So yeah, start listening more and finding those opportunities to listen and to ask.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you both. I'm always mindful of the time. I just wanted a minute to sum up. So we've reached the end of the hour pretty much. Firstly, a massive, massive thank you to both of you for speaking this afternoon, for putting so much time and effort into the presentation in terms of stuff that you shared. I mentioned at the top of my call that at the top of the call that I'm a massive advocate of continued professional development, and that's how people, stand out in a comms market. And undoubtedly, there are things here that people will have learned and some stuff that they can take away with them. So a massive thank you for that. We have, to everyone listening, we have dropped into the chat the LinkedIn addresses, as it were, for Suzanne and Rebecca. Again, I'm a massive advocate of facilitating introductions, as you'd expect from a recruiter, and learning from each other. So please do connect with Suzanne and Rebecca. I'm sure they'd be happy to share more info. We are recording this. It will go onto VMA Group's YouTube channel. So if you want to listen back to some of the stuff that Rebecca and Suzanne talked about, please do. I think we might be able to share some of the slides as well that we've had and we talked about this afternoon. So we'll follow up with an email to everyone that's joined this afternoon or registered with those slides. And undoubtedly, we will invite Suzanne and Rebecca back again, because I think there's probably other stuff that they can teach us in the year ahead. So actually, genuinely, if there are other topics that you think would be really interesting to talk about, I can pick that up with Suzanne and Rebecca, and I'm sure we can come back again and talk about other things. So thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you to everyone listening in. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch as well while you've been chatting and listening. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And one way or another, I'm sure we'll speak again sometime soon. Thank you to all. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.